It is often remarked that wits win you a war rather than numbers. There's been thousands of examples of this throughout history where one side, despite being on defense for a vast amount of time, with a sudden breakthrough and the help of sheer intelligence, gets the help it needs to turn the tables. This is precisely what happened during World War II when Allied forces cracked the Enigma code used by Germans in their radio communications. This not only helped lead to an Allied victory, but also proved how the pure intelligence of a small group of people can save millions of lives. So how did these Enigma machines work, and why was the Enigma code so difficult to crack? What's going on, guys? I'm Luke with Today in Tech, and today we're about to discover why. The Enigma. And that is all once more for today, guys. If you enjoyed the video, please consider leaving a like or even subscribing to the channel. Make sure to hit that notification bell next to the subscription button if you do. Also, be sure to drop in the comments what other key pieces of cool movie tech you'd like us to check out, and our social media is linked in the description below. Be sure to follow us so you don't miss anything in the future. Thank you so much for watching once again, guys, and we'll see you in the next one.